21 minutes past 9 Central African time, and we're going to be having our hashtag Africa Focus feature. If you're new to the show, this is the part of the show where we look at some of the biggest, most important developments on the African continent that are not spoken about enough. And we'll be heading over to Uganda, where Parliament has essentially approved the deployment of Ugandan troops, get this, to Gaza. This is part of a proposed international stabilization force linked to the US-backed post-war plan. Uganda says its forces would be involved in security and stabilization. But I think the bigger questions are about who these troops would report to, what their mandate would be, and what happens if their mission comes face-to-face with armed Palestinian groups or Israeli forces. Uganda has a long history of regional peacekeeping, including deployments, I think, around the continent: Somalia, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. But Gaza, man, think about it, presents an entirely different political and military landscape. And we're going to be trying to dissect all of this and try and get some insight on what kind of role would Ghana be playing and the decision to go about agreeing to this venture. And we'll be speaking to a very, very good friend of the show, Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy. Prof, good morning. Always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. It's icy cold out there, but
yeah,
our hearts are warm.
No, most definitely. And thank you so much for joining us despite the bitter cold. I want to begin with the headline here. Uganda is prepared to send troops to Gaza. Almost unbelievable. But then when you think about the links between the two countries historically, it almost makes sense. From your point of view, what does Uganda gain strategically by taking on this role? And just generally, what do you make of it?
Yeah. No, thanks for the invitation to talk about this. It's a curious situation and puzzling, I think, for many people. But I discern a pattern here of behavior which we need to explore. It's worth writing an academic article for a journal or do a proper panel discussion, and I'll explain why I think this is important. I remember months ago, in fact, a year or two ago, another headline came up that said that Kenya was asked to send police officers to Haiti. Uganda has been asked to send military troops to Gaza. Eswatini agrees to receive prisoners from the US to put them in a special prison here at home. And there were one or two other countries. So what is going on here? This is the price you pay as a leader of a country in Africa if you agree to the invitation by the Trump administration to form part of its alliance in the world against perceived enemies in Russia, China, and elsewhere in the world. So what is happening is that African nations, all of us, have been given an opportunity to take sides in this emerging global order and disorder that was triggered by the Trump administration in its desperate attempt to maintain or retain or recover lost American prestige elsewhere in the world. And in an effort to develop or build an alliance of like-minded nations to stand up against the emerging superpower or hegemon in the East, the rising dragon, and its own alliance. So this is China, who primarily works in the context of BRICS, but it also has alliance partners closer to home because of the threats around Taiwan and Japan and so on. And so here we are sitting literally, if you look at the world map, in the middle between West and East. This is some of our listeners and our academics who listen to this and those have a keen interest in history will realize that this is another form of the Cold War. This is Cold War 2.0. And I'm saying this quite provocatively because many people say now with the Trump administration, the disregard for multilateralism, the breakdown of international rule, or the international rules-based order, which was created and upheld by the West, the unleashing of the dogs of war in Ukraine and the Middle East and Sudan and elsewhere in Africa. Many people think naively, in my view, that look, the UN is going to rescue us from this disorder, and what we see is the emergence of a multipolar world. The EU will be a strong player. If Africa can find a collective voice, we will be a strong player. There are countries in Asia to do the same, to balance, balance of power, so to say. And then we will collectively work together to save the world from, disaster. The sketch that I'm making is, in my view, is naive. As I said, the Americans are desperately trying to prevent to control the morbid symptoms that goes with a failing hegemon or a declining superpower. It's the end of imperium for America. And Trump is one of the desperate appointments, perhaps by the deep state, if you want. This is conspiracy, to make sure that America doesn't lose too much of its power and influence, because it knows that it is facing a decline and is facing the rise of the alternative hegemon, which is, hegemons and imperial powers. They come and go. They have a life cycle. We are now witnessing the symptoms of the decline of one. And very soon in another conversation, we must talk about what are the symptoms of the rise of an alternative hegemon. What is it that they do? And by the way, as African nations, we're also subject to very subtle and powerful, actually, invitations from the rising hegemon. Join us. And we have. Many of us have joined BRICS. We made a choice. Uganda didn't. Uganda, Kenya, Morocco, Rwanda have chosen to side with the other hegemon. The Americans say, we will come and support you. We will help you to fight terrorism, violent extremism, jihadism. We'll give you weapons. We'll train your soldiers. But at the same time, can we make an agreement so that we have access to your critical minerals? We even prepare to build corridors to extract these minerals. The Lobito corridor is an example. And Angola is another example who's made that choice for the one block instead of the other block. What these nations have to pay in return is for the master to say to the follower, can I deploy you to go and clean up a mess here on my behalf? I'll give you money. Or can you clean up the mess over there? I'll also give you money. So this is a very long way to explain why Uganda has fallen for this trick by the Americans and agreed to participate with 4, 5, or 6 other nations elsewhere in the world, in Eastern Europe, for example, to play this game with the Americans. What the Americans want to do in Gaza is to appropriate the United Nations Security Council resolution around a 15 or a 20-point plan to return Gaza to peace and stability and redevelopment. To appropriate the UN peace plan, make it part of an alternative Security Council driven by the Trump administration, a council for peace, and it has its own agenda with Gaza, which it is now beginning to implement. And the purpose of an international stabilization force, which is UN language, but now controlled by the Americans and the Israelis, is to get, subservient nations to send troops to form some kind of a demilitarization. It's about like Chop Security or Beagle Watch. to go and maintain peace and security. The idea behind it is to force Hamas to disarm and demilitarize under the careful watch eye of this peace force or stabilization force or mission, if you want. The Americans are not going to put boots on the ground. I think they're unwilling, and maybe they can't, or they're too sensitive, or they've got other fish to fry elsewhere and they're not winning that one. And so the Israelis really is in control of this exercise. And
I want us, Prof. I want us to park it there when it comes to the Israelis. I want us to take a quick break, and I think we'll just expand a bit more on their role on this. And I think most importantly, African nations and why there isn't, one single, I think, voice and approach to issues like Gaza and others across the world, while other blocs like the EU seems to be agreeing on a lot of issues, but Africa seems to be so fragmented. I think there's so much more to unpack on this.